live! Happy Suicide Prevention Week. And yesterday was I think it was World Suicide Prevention Day, right? Dr. Bart Andrews?
It was World Suicide Prevention Day yesterday.
Right.
It's all over now. We're done. We've accomplished everything we needed to accomplish.
Weeks, like congratulations, we have more than one. I'm at Dr. Foreman. You've hit hashtag suicide prevention social media chat, hashtag SPSM. We're here. We talked with someone from the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention and some of the media that she had planned. And we're here with someone from the American Association of Suicidology, Dr. Mike Anestis today. It's going to be super cool, talking a little bit about the AAS Listserve, which should be fun. The only problem, folks, is that this may be the first SPSM where Dr. Bart Andrews and I are contractually obligated to not let it be a dumpster fire. Never had to make that promise before, but I feel like maybe Mike's seen a few episodes of the show.
Uh-oh.
April, we have a plan. We have a plan.
What?
Tony and I talked about this earlier. If a dumpster fire starts, we're going to have you do a Foreman monologue, and that will suck all of the oxygen out of the universe, and will shut down the fire. Fires need oxygen, and we've observed, actually, NASA in its latest global warming study showed that during a Dr. Foreman monologue, oxygen levels across the planet drop about 15%. So we think we've got, Tony, I think we've got a good plan.
And there's
we've got it covered.
5% chance of mansplaining. Okay, so I'm at Dr. Foreman. I want to introduce our co-producer. This is Mr. Tony Wood, chair of the board of AAS. Quantify, tell them all about yourself.
I am Tony Wood. I am the co-founder and producer of SPSM. I'm also the chair of the board of the American Association of Suicidology. Happy to have Mike here tonight. Another solid AAS member.
Solidarity.
Keep up the good work, Mike. Also, I am the COO of Quantify, a company that's dedicated to producing software products for mental health and behavioral health stuff.
Fantastic, and we have our co-moderator, I can't say it, Dr. Bart Andrews. Dr. Bart Andrews.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Dr. Bart Andrews, Vice President of Clinical Practice and Evaluation at Behavioral Health Response, an amazing crisis agency in St. Louis, Missouri. Excited, I've gotten to meet Dr. Anestis at a gun and suicide seminar at WashU that was very cool, and am a fan of his work and so excited about the show and learning more about the AAS Listserve, which I apparently belong to, but I've never gotten an actual email from the Listserve, so I'll learn more.
I can fix that.
Yes, that happened to me too. And everyone, without any further ado, we had tried to have him for our very special episode of Dangerous Words, which was actually as exciting as the title sounds. But he's made it this time. Dr. Mike Anestis. Mike, can you introduce yourself?
Certainly. Hi, I am Mike Anestis. I'm the Nani Bell Stokes Professor of Psychology at USM, and for the past year or so, been administrator of the AAS Listserve, which we are here to chat about today, right?
Absolutely. And we should start by saying you've written all the rules and you're the person 100% responsible for the listserv.
Yes.
And so all complaints and angry spam and trolling are supposed to go to you tonight? Is that
it's all works? My fault. I've made all the bad decisions and all the good decisions.
If you can't tell, for those of you who don't love sarcasm, in fact, like none of that's true, and we're going to explain a little bit about how that works. Before we do this, this is Mike. You know Dr. Bill Schmitz.
I do.
So I want to show you and everyone. I got this in the mail. Tony and I have been out in D.C. at a suicide prevention hackathon, and when I came back, and I don't know who sent it. So if one of you SPSMers sent this, nobody can figure out who's responsible for this.
Keep calm and let Bill Schmitz handle it.
I don't know where this came from. Bill, please tell me you didn't send this to me. Who sent this?
I hope so, but I'd like to have one.
You may send all your complaints about the listserv to Dr. Bill Schmitz. So we're trying to solve a little.
Past president.
I am down with that idea.
Suicidology, might add.
Mike, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about how you ended up moderating the listserv and what it is?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I'm a suicide researcher. I run the Suicide Emotion Dysregulation Lab down at USM, where my wife and I are professors in the clinical psych program. I have been an AAS member since I got my PhD and have just been sort of volunteering to serve where I can. Chaired AAS's conference in Atlanta and just sort of done what I can to help out. And about a year ago, Tom Ellis had been doing this for something like 77 years and decided to stop. And so Dave Miller asked if I would step in. And so I just did. It sounds like it was going to be pretty mellow task, and most days it is. Yeah.
Wow, what a lovely explanation. So we talked a little bit about what a listserv is, and Tony may need to help us. So can you tell us a little bit about what the AAS Listserv is?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, first thing is it's the AAS Listserv, but not everybody on it is an AAS member, which is actually a bit of an issue with some of the rules I think we'll talk about. But it's really meant to be a really diverse community of folks all interested in suicide prevention, but from different angles. So there's researchers like myself. There are folks primarily clinicians. There are loss survivors, attempt survivors, folks from every sort of angle of suicide prevention who are on there. And so the idea is to create a forum in which folks can share ideas, ask questions. It could be as simple as like, hey, I need a referral in this city, or it could be, did you see this article, or what do you think about this idea, or did Mike ruin the world? And all of these are plausible topics.
Tony, can you explain, we did try to include some Wikipedia links to what a listserv actually is, because this is actually some of the earliest forms of social media, the way that we think of it, electronic social media.
So in the olden days, before all of the delightful things like MySpace and Twitter and Facebook, there was just email. There were email, and that was it. There was no other way to really do electronic messaging, and email was very cumbersome in itself. It was really, this was all sort of total nerd city. There was no normal people on the internet. It was all computer scientists at this point in time. So the way that they did things was they set up these listservs so that you could subscribe to an email list, so that when you sent an email to that special email address, it sent an email out to everyone, but it kept those, eventually, as the features got better and better, it kept those conversations organized into groups. So you got an effect that is sort of similar to a commenting sort of system, similar to nesting of conversations in email, but much more rudimentary. It's not as easy to cope with as modern nested conversations are in, say, Gmail or Mail, the app for Mac, for Macs on iOS.
But of note, almost everyone these days has email. Even I was like, I don't know about email back in the day. Everyone has it, and it's a modality that almost everyone is comfortable with.
Absolutely.
And so, Mike, can you tell us about who hosts the AAS Listserv, and tell us a little bit about what that particular one does?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by who hosts it exactly.
I think, doesn't APA host it?
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. So it's on an APA, and I got, in all honesty, my intro to the mechanics of the listserv was pretty basic. So I've been kind of playing around with the site, finding the features that are available and making sure it works. But yeah, it's housed on an APA website that allows me to access all the various features of the member list, or if someone says, I'm not getting emails, I can look up their account and see what the issue is. But yeah, APA runs it.
And there are like a set of rules of engagement, and those are related to sort of APA, from what I understand. Like, we've adopted them sort of really similar, and those are not Mike Anestis' personal rules, correct?
Right. I mean, I think they're based in part on APA guidelines, but also from the AAS board. And they're sort of meant to do, as far as I can tell, sort of two things. One is just basic quality control in the conversation to keep people happy. So a lot of the rules are similar to most listserv rules, which is basically just say what you need to say kindly as much as possible, and then if there's nothing kind to say, maybe email them off the listserv so that the sort of public transmission of information is largely professional and kind. And then the other part of it is to manage what I said before, which is that it's an AAS listserv, but not everyone's an AAS member. And so it's trying to keep discussions of AAS specific material off of that public forum, because that's really meant for AAS specific avenues. And so folks who aren't AAS members maybe shouldn't be in part of a conversation about who should be on the board, or a decision was made by someone, or costs of different things like that. So it's meant to sort of facilitate a conversation without sort of butting up against the needs of AAS as an organization.
I'm sending out the link to join listserv right now.
Okay.
It's out.
Sorry, folks have been asking, so I'm going to make sure and send that out right now. So you get the task of moderating the listserv, and moderating can mean a lot of different things in the social media space. So like Bart Andrews and I moderate SPSM, and Tony Wood, and we've decided that it's the Muppet Show of suicide prevention, so moderate has like its own much looser meaning. But when we talk about moderating the AAS board, what does that involve for you in terms of a task?
Yeah, I mean, most days what it means is emails come through the listserv. They don't get pre-screened, right? There are some listservs where you send an email and then someone reads it and decides whether or not it gets on. It doesn't do that. So someone sends an email, it goes through, I get a notification, I read it. So I'm on other listservs, an email comes in from a listserv, I'm like, probably not going to read it. These ones I have to read, and I basically make sure that they meet all the rules. And if they do, I don't really do anything unless I want to reply just as a member of the listserv. If they do sort of violate a rule, I'm a little bit cautious in my response relative to what I think the role is supposed to be, but what I largely do is reach out to that person back channel if it's one person and say, hey, could you avoid that, please? Or sort of as non-accusatory way as possible to the group, especially if it's multiple people, say, hey, this thing's happening, can it not be happening? Here's a reminder of the rules, and then I cross my fingers and see where it goes.
That is very, very, that's very gentle. So one of the things that we want to talk about is that the listserv actually has people participating in it from a lot of different communities, and so their sense of what the niceties are about how you would participate in a professional forum, like some people treat all online as if it's all Reddit or it's all like a commentary thing, and in fact the listserv the listserv sort of house rules are a little bit different than sort of an anything goes, and certainly different. We wouldn't have Procto Frog on the listserv, most likely, right, Bart?
I have no idea what that is, but I'm a little scared.
It's okay.
It's a
colon health. It's all about colon health.
Probably not.
No dumpster fire, Bart. I promise. I'm breaking my promise. So
you brought up Procto Frog. You say they have a dumpster fire, and then you bring up Procto Frog.
He's so cute. So
yeah.
So tell us a little bit about like how the tone is different. So like if explaining like a place where we might discuss and debate sports teams, or a place where we might really talk with people really passionately, like on Reddit about suicide and guns versus what's going to happen on the AAS listserv. Can you sort of like explain differences in tone?
Yeah, sure. And keep in mind that most of my work is done looking at guns and suicide while living in Mississippi and being a fast-talking liberal Yankee, right? So I am aware about the need to talk about sensitive issues with a diverse set of opinions and the need to be able to say what you need to say, which makes sense. I'm very much on board with that. In terms of the listserv, though, what it basically comes down to is personal attacks, which is a gray area, admittedly, but basically if there's any possibility it's going to be thought of as personal attack, just don't do it. And then also is harsh generalizations, and you see that from a bunch of, one of the beauties of AAS is that it's a diverse group of folks from a lot of different perspectives. One of the dangers of any diverse group is that people butt heads, right? And so sometimes one group or a member of a group says something harsh about another group in general, which then gets everybody upset. And so instead of talking about the topic, we're talking about how we're talking about the topic. And so the topic is gone, and now we're all talking about each other's talking, which then means I have to come in and send an email about the way we're talking.
So you're really talking, and this is actually a really interesting point, so you're really talking about the difference between sort of academic content and interpersonal process. And so that a lot of what you're saying, that the tone of the AAS Listserv is really for about suicide prevention content, and we should take interpersonal process when, for the most part, especially really heated stuff, maybe like more privately. Is that what you're saying?
Well, and I mean, express distress. I mean, the bottom line is someone says, and there have been times where people have said some not so great things, right? And people shouldn't then have no opportunity to point out that it was not so great, but just finding a way, and it's a difficult task for all of us, especially in a really personal, intense, emotional topic, to find a tactful way to express displeasure if you've been hurt, right? But that's the task in front of us if we're going to be a part of this community, which people opt into or not obligated to be a part of, right? And so finding a way to do it, and then by all means send a back channel email to that person that breaks all of the rules, because that's fine. I have no interest in policing that. People should do what they do. I do that kind of stuff all the time, but in this particular forum,
I won't ask for examples.
Fair enough.
So
why can't we have examples? That would be great. Examples would be awesome.
Look, the best thing I've ever done in my life is gotten Comcast to hang up on me because they were offended.
What?
Yeah.
That's not possible.
No, I did it.
I think that I'm an anus. How did you get it done?
I spent a lot of time talking to Comcast. It builds up a lot of energy, but I found the right place to channel it.
Now I know what to do with myself on a bad day.
I support that. Organization.
We talked about dangerous words, and people are talking about the link to the show and sort of sharing a little bit about that. But we talked about that as a project that really is one of the reasons to have the listserv, and one of the values or benefits of the listserv, where folks with varying levels of digital exposure, it's a technology everyone can use that is social. And dangerous words is one of the important projects that many collaborations, much like SPSM, have come out of the listserv. Explain how that happened.
Yeah, sure. And and I obviously missed the last conversation, so I apologize if I repeat anything that Craig talked about. But basically, I don't know, at this point, two and a half years ago, article came out in Newsweek that heavily featured an interview with Thomas Joyner, who was my grad mentor, my postdoc mentor, talking about his father's death by suicide and talking about suicide in general, and it violated a number of the media guideline rules. But when I read it, I was blown away by it. I was like, this is great. This is mainstream, in-depth coverage. This is taking science and making it accessible for the masses on a topic that means a lot to me, written by someone that is important to me. And I shared a lot of personal information. So I was like, this is great. And then I saw someone posted a link to the listserv about it. I was like, this is going to go awesome. And then it didn't. Much to my surprise, people were upset. Yes, that would be a dumpster fire in some ways.
I'm sorry.
It set off, but so people were upset. And a lot of the concerns was, hey, this violated some guidelines that are out there, and that's going to cause much more harm than good. And that's a point I disagreed with. But when I heard or actually read all those things, my initial instinct was, wow, I should chime in. But then I thought, I'm pretty upset about this. I'm actually kind of offended a little bit, and I think that my email is going to come across poorly. And so I back-channel emailed some friends of mine, folks like Craig Bryan and Dave Klonsky, and said, here's what I'm thinking, and it surprised me, and they agreed. And so our point was, well, we're scientists. Our job isn't to argue it. Our job is to test our assumptions. I don't think these fears are needed, but I can't back that up with anything, right? So we decided to put our money where our mouth is and just run a study where we were actually going to take that article, expose people to it, check in on them right afterwards, check on them a month later, expose people to that same article, but take all of the violations out, check on them right after, check on them a month later, but also expose people to an article with really in-depth description about death by cancer, with the idea being twofold. One, cancer used to be stigmatized just like suicide, right? People didn't used to talk about it, now they do. And two, not too many people argue against exposing people to information about cancer, right? And so we randomized people, and consistent with what we expected, it didn't upset anyone, certainly not more than the other articles did. And in fact, for folks who were in a higher risk group, being in the violation article actually made them feel better relative to the other ones. So it did a lot of stuff similar to what Maddie Gold has shown about just asking about suicide, that some of our fears maybe don't pan out.
And I mean, that's the value, which is if you can have a content discussion, you can say, that's actually an empiric question, and maybe we could test that. Let's talk about how we can do that. And there have only been a couple studies along that vein. We have a lot of conversations about media guidelines and actually not a lot of research. So just a couple studies, like one in the US, there was one over in Europe, and I want to say it was like Austria. Maybe I got that wrong.
There's another US one coming out now that was a follow-up to ours that does the same thing.
Ooh, what did they find, Mike?
Similar stuff looking at specific rules.
That's pretty interesting. Bart, you're making a Bart face.
Well, I mean, so I think this is an important conversation because I am very publicly vocal about safe messaging guidelines and what they are and what they are not. And I think the thing that's frustrating for me as someone that takes research very seriously is the research that Maddie Gould did was amazing research. It's a beautiful research. Her study is so well designed. But people took this evaluation of large-scale mass media and then applied it to situations that her research did not even in any way cover or support in any way, right? And so people went way beyond the scope of what the research said in terms of what safe messaging is, and here's where I get worked up. People then use this research to abuse and accuse other people of being dangerous. I've heard this. I've heard people say, you're being dangerous right now.
Especially reporters and folks with lived experience.
You got it. And one, there's nothing there. You don't have any evidence that can say that this person telling their story this way is dangerous. There's no research to support that. So if you're looking for that study, please find it for me and give it to me. Now, if someone with lived experience owns a newspaper and proceeds to run a suicide story across a 2 million population area, maybe that's an issue, right?
But that's an empiric question. We actually that's the point that Mike's making. I think, Mike, right? That all these questions are actually empiric questions, right, Mike?
Yeah, and I mean, no one's arguing there's no bad way to talk about suicide or nothing harmful can come from any violation. I think the idea is people get really on edge on something that is a well-intentioned but largely untested idea that can inhibit conversations that are already too inhibited as it is.
Right. As a matter of fact, Dr. Searle said, so, I mean, Mike, are you suggesting that we just, ditch the media reporting guides?
No, because I don't think we need to ditch them. I think that in addition, they don't cause suicidality. They could still, if someone talks really horribly about suicide, could offend someone, hurt someone's feelings. I mean, being guarded and careful, and especially the proactive ones, provide information about where to get care. Those are all good things, right? No harm comes from it. As long as we don't become so militant that as soon as anybody writes something about suicide, all we do is attack them for the way they talked about suicide. Because all it's going to do is make people not want to talk about it.
Now, wait a minute. Didn't you just release some social media about messaging about suicide and about collaborating with folks?
Did I?
Didn't you just do, I think, some social media?
Are we talking about the editorial?
Yeah, it's really good.
Yes. I wrote an editorial as part of a committee that I'm on for a different group called the Science for the Society of Clinical Psychology, or Society for a Science of Clinical Psychology, SSCP. And we're doing monthly pieces trying to sort of proactively talk about science-based mental health. And so I wrote one for Suicide Prevention Month, which was largely, I like the idea of Suicide Prevention Month, but if we all sort of hold hands once a year in September and talk about this and then don't really implement any of the things we learned at work, that's not really effective, right? So the lesson we've learned from the data is that we're not doing such a good job these past decade and a half of preventing suicide, and so we probably need to change gears. And so to me, I wrote a piece that said, why don't we sort of, again, communicate with one another, take some of the lessons we've learned about means safety, about people sharing their stories, about evidence-based treatments, and about the idea that a lot of the high-risk folks don't actually ever come in for treatment and actually, put our money where our mouth is and try to reach these people and change things instead of just talking. Sometimes, and again, this just might be me sort of being in the get off my lawn crew on stuff like this sometimes.
Get off my lawn!
Yeah. To me, sometimes people turn this into a glamour show rather than a solution show. Nothing comes out of it. So.
You make an interesting point, because now I'm like, well, great, let's get, and now I'm going to mess up the name, and for folks who don't know, like, if you have a name, if your organization has a name, if you have a title, I'm going to mess it up. I don't know what's wrong with my brain, but it's the National Sporting Rifle Association, I think, right? Or am I close?
You're close. It's good. Roll with it.
Which one is it really, Mike?
NSSF, and honestly, I don't have the acronym spelled out in my head either, and I could be wrong. But you're close enough that let's roll with it.
So, like, why couldn't we invite folks from, like, the NRA or different firearm sporting associations to be a part of the listserv? Like, or because that's, like, something, like, where they might have an opinion about media and reporting guidelines. As a matter of fact, isn't it Elaine Franks, who, do I have that name right? Is Elaine Franks or Frank?
Frank.
And is it okay, but Elaine is right.
Yes, but there's only one Frank.
Yes. And I think we're hopefully going to have her on the show, which I'm pretty excited about. Like, they did media messaging with, their local gun shop owners and things like that, and they were involved in crafting the message and selecting things. And when they were invited into the conversation, they were able to create really good content. Like, can we use some of the infrastructures we have for sharing with, in AAS and, with folks that haven't been our natural partners?
I mean, I hope so. I think that the upcoming project with NSSF, if we're getting that acronym right, is a great sign of that, the willingness. I think that it was at first, I think some of those agencies were hesitant for a number of reasons to think about suicide prevention, and it seems that recently, whether it's through Kathy Barber's work with stuff like this or some of the stuff the DoD is doing right now, there are a lot of people reaching out, and some conversations are being had that I think are productive. I don't know if they'd be interested in joining something like the listserv or not, because I don't know if they are like full-time invested in suicide prevention, but I think they'd be interested in being part of conversations specific to guns and suicide, so a subsection of the listserv conversation.
Surely we could, like, if they're a person that we like to have at the table, and then I often wonder, like, if we say that that's important and we say that they're important partners, like, are we thinking about the way that we're having conversations so that someone could, like, pull up to our lunch table and they would feel like they could get something valuable and not be alienated from the conversation?
I hope so. I mean, I think a lot of the folks who are going out of the way to change messaging, in terms of the way I'm here and talk about messaging, but the way that we talk about guns in the conversations to not scare people off. So people use the terms means restriction. That's not going to happen. Means safety is more acceptable for a lot of folks, although even within the sort of gun owning community, the idea of gun safety is a term they want to change because it means something different. We're sort of usurping a phrase that has been used for other stuff for our own, and so it's sort of finding a way where we can find common terminology that doesn't seem to talk about coming to get something or take something away or judge anything. And so most of the conversations I have about this, anything I'm writing about this, I go out of my way to say this is not a conversation about the value of guns or gun control or the Second Amendment. This is simply acknowledging this is happening, and we probably don't want it to, and I don't think you do either. And I think that conversations like that don't alienate anyone, at least if you get the right people.
Tony Wood, you just posted a tweet that talked about that we do have conventions in the suicide prevention community about talking about suicide in a way that it really is considerate. We have some sort of handy conventions about that.
Yeah.
And I bet that actually applies to some of this other stuff, like being as considerate with all of our conversation as we are about some specific conventions. Did you want to expand on that, Tony?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting area that I ran into this weekend with some people who are professionals in other fields, and they are interested in suicide.
Where you were?
I was at the White House and Veterans Administration hackathon for veteran suicide prevention. And what is the name of the whole thing? It has a whole
Veterans Affairs Suicide Prevention and Innovation
event.
Yeah, VASPI.
So I was a judge for the contest that went on, and I also did a lot of facilitating of various things that happened there's a whole thing on the web. You can see all that anytime. It was really cool. So the cool thing was that we got access to a lot of people who care about suicide prevention, especially with regard to veterans, but they're not suicide preventionists. They don't spend a lot of time in the suicide prevention community. They don't really know how we talk about it. And so they still, when they're trying to describe something related to suicide and have a conversation with you, they reach for words because they don't have language programmed in their head for it. So they still use words like succeeded and failed because that is like it's a chain of logic, and in regular English, those are kind of things that, like, if you succeed at something, it is complete. If you fail at something, it is incomplete. They do some sort of simple logical stuff. But they would love to be more considerate. They just don't have the language in their head. So wouldn't it be cool if we were able to sort of be more inviting about the language that we use, and instead of policing their language, do what I ran into, and I said, in the suicide prevention community, we don't say failed, we say survived, because that's what happened. And they were like, oh, that's brilliant. Because when you talk to them in a nice way and you're not a jerk about it, they want this to happen. They want to save veterans' lives. A lot of professionals want to do the same. They want to be a positive part of this overall effort. So I think we can give that to people.
Don't be a dick.
Yeah, don't be a dick. That's Will Wheaton.
Bart, I saw you have several thoughts.
Well, I think Tony hit the nail on the head as usual, because Tony gets communication. When people are engaged in conversation, they want to help. They want to help prevent suicide. Cutting them down on the words they're choosing is not the way to go about opening conversations. And in fact, there's actually really good research about how political correctness in general shuts down dialogue and conversation, silos conversations, and results in less attitudinal change. It locks in attitudes. And so, particularly when you're talking to people who are worried that you're going to try to take their guns away, or you're worried that your way that you're going to help people stay safe from suicide is to control guns, that's not going to be an effective way to communicate with folks, right? We really want to be inclusive, and here's the interesting thing. Inclusion means we've got to be inclusive of people who don't always share our beliefs, our language, and the way we view the world. We often think of inclusion only that people include us, right? Which is one of my big challenges about inclusion, because I'm a huge fan of inclusion, but inclusion is much bigger than you being included. Inclusion means that you include others and you're respectful and caring. And so one of the things that I'm really, and we're working on this at BHR right now, is when we're working with people, are we being dignified? Are we treating them with dignity? Are we treating them with respect? And if you follow those rules, if you always think about, am I treating this person with dignity and respect? If you're thoughtful about that, you will more often treat people with dignity and respect, and they'll recognize that. You'll get more conversations, and you'll make more progress. So I think that's absolutely key. Doesn't mean we shouldn't stop educating about better ways to talk about things, and there's ways to do that. Now, I'll be honest, media, newspaper reporters, they should know better. And if you're writing an article, then I'm going to call you out if you use commit suicide or you use successful. I might say something to you. If you use a head clutcher photo, I might say something to you. But in a one-to-one conversation with somebody, I'm not going to say you shouldn't say commit and you shouldn't say successful. How is that furthering my cause at that point?
You can say something to people and in a dignified way that says, I'd really love it if you'd say it like this, because.
You can't. You can, depending on where you're at in that relationship with the person. If you've just started a conversation with somebody, the first thing you say is, oh, by the way, we don't say commit suicide, right? That's not the way to engage someone at the beginning of a conversation. That's my 2 cents. Other folks save it always at the end.
And to sort of sum up my personal take, it's something. I had an old neighbor when I was a kid who was an 80-year-old engineer, and he was a really funny guy. And this is something that it's a common thing you've heard before. And he would say, "You catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar." And so you just have to simply be friendly. And so if they make a mistake honestly, if they don't mean to be, if their intention is not hatred and vitriol, then you should answer that with an appropriate level of niceness and say, well, instead of saying failed, you could say survived. And they kind of think, they think it's fine. It's like, oh, that's a good idea.
Mike, I saw you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a matter of knowing your audience and knowing your goal. So if I'm training our doctoral students to do risk assessments, my first slide talks about the language you use and the language you don't use. And the idea being each one of those folks is going to reach other folks and sort of spread that message gradually. And they're in a position where I'm supposed to be teaching them and they're supposed to be listening to my words, and that's fine. If I'm talking to a reporter, I even think about sort of Linehan interpersonal effectiveness skills, right? And I've got objectives, self-respect, and relationship. And in those situations right now, objective and relationship need to be prioritized a little bit for me. So objective is I need people to talk about this. I need them to take as much science and get it to as large an audience as possible. So I need to do things that are going to facilitate that to an extent. Obviously, there are limits where you might need to step in, but I think those limits are further off than others do. That was the whole dangerous words thing. So unless they are doing some absolutely egregious, horrific, dangerous thing, if they are doing a task that furthers my goal of people talking about this, then I got to let some things go and hope that the other work that we're doing beneath the surface, and work that is maybe not beneath the surface, it's directly about messaging, accomplish those other tasks. But if I shut down the other one, then the whole thing is messed up. The whole system is messed up.
So one of the questions that was asked in the Twitter feed about this, Mike, was what should we still be referring people to the reporting on suicide guidelines?
Depends on how you do it and who it is.
So give us a couple, for instance. So if we see something or people ask us how to write about it, and they may be writing a lived experience story where they're helping someone else share their story, and Sarah Schuster is going to be on from the Mighty to help us a little bit also with this next week. But can you tell we had a theme this month? Give us an example of, you see someone's approached you and says, I want this story to go through, and you're going to help them shape it up so that it's an effective, thoughtful, safe message.
Yeah, in a conversation, if someone's asking about that, I'll say it. And also, sometimes I won't, rather than correct someone, I'll say something and be like, oh, by the way, this is the phrase I say for this reason. Not even correcting them, just pointing out like, oh, this might be unusual. I don't know if people say this around here. This is what I say. So that as little of what I'm doing is correcting them and just giving them the information. But if someone directly asks, yeah, by all means, send them the link. There's nothing but good that can come from that, right? It's just a matter of don't stop someone from talking by correcting. The same way, if you're talking about anything you're unfamiliar with and someone comes in and tells you you're doing it wrong, you might be less inclined to continue the conversation. The same rules apply in this conversation when you're on the other side of it. So just consider, again, if you were in that reporter's shoes, what would your response be? And if that response is not something you're okay with, don't pursue your effort to send the link. But if you think it needs to happen, if this is a situation where you're like, look, this is an egregious violation, and I will not feel okay with myself or the interaction if I don't send this, then you do what you got to do. Just be judicious on it.
Now, you mentioned Marshall Linehan sort of interpersonal goals, and I love DBT, so I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of if the goal is the relationship, or if the goal is the objective, or if the goal is standing up for yourself and self-respect. Mm-hmm. Can you talk? But I am really certain that not everybody in our audience sort of knows what that is, and the idea is that you use very different skills with people depending on what your goal is. Can you just review that concept, because I think that's actually really bright.
No problem. These are some of my favorite, clearly some of my favorite Linehan skills. And so the idea is, in any given situation, you're going to have actually more than one goal. And we a lot of times in any interaction, especially in emotional, we're not really thinking about our goal going in, which is part of the point. But Linehan breaks it into three things: objectives, relationship, and self-respect. And so think about if you're going into your boss's office trying to get a raise, the objective would be to get that raise, right? The relationship would be making sure your boss is still feeling good about you. Self-respect would be, I leave this conversation feeling like I was consistent with my values, I'm okay with who I am and what I did in that interaction. And the bottom line is, in an ideal world, all of those things are fully satisfied in every interaction, but that's not reality, right? Especially because we can't control who the other person is and how they're acting. And so we have to figure out, okay, well, in this situation, what are my top goals, and how is what I'm going to do going to further my efforts to accomplish those goals? And sometimes you have to prioritize one or two over the others, or other, depending on the situation. It's not always even the same with the same person. Sometimes with my partner, it's about self-respect. Sometimes with my partner, it's about the relationship. There isn't a right or wrong. It depends on the individual themselves and the interaction. And you're wrong generally if you leave the interaction feeling crappy about it. Why do I feel crappy about it? Well, I don't feel good about myself. Or, man, I really feel like I hurt their feelings and I didn't need to. Well,
or I didn't get what I wanted and I did that. And then they totally made it harder to get what I wanted.
Right. And so it's about thinking through, what is it that's most important? And when I'm talking to the media, I don't know this person. So I want the relationship, and that I want to be someone they come to talk to in the future, because I feel like I have some sciencey things to say to them, right? I obviously have self-respect stuff, and that I don't want to say horrific stuff just to be on their media stuff. But the big thing in most media conversations is objective, which is simply, I have a message. That message needs to have a broader audience, and this is the person who can do it.
So one of the tweets in the feed was that Suck It Suicide, do you know who they are, Mike, or not? I
know of them. I don't know that much about it, but I've certainly heard of them.
Okay, so Kate Hardy was a guest, and Amelia, who's one of our SPSM core community members, is on the board, and it is a nonprofit in Michigan that helps raise money to cover like cleanup and burial costs for people who died by suicide, and especially for folks who aren't covered in that. And they have a big reach in the music community, especially the alternative music community, and so they have all this great, wonderful language and design and stuff that probably would not be listserv appropriate. But by the way, I wore a Suck It Suicide shirt on like to something or on something, and someone saw it, and like who usually sees me in my VA like Doc Foreman suit or whatever, and they're like, that fucking rocked. And they're like, we saw that, you're badass, and like they really responded well to that. And I would not want the director of my hospital to see that shirt on me.
Yeah.
Quite the same way. What do you think about like different kinds of messaging and different kinds of language? They were like, so how does this work?
I mean, I think it's, again, I like the idea of diversity of opinions, diversity of approaches, as long as they are considerate of others, right? So I think it's fine. I think it's interesting and different. It might get the attention of some folks that might not otherwise know about it, or folks might relate to it differently. If it's getting a positive response, it's doing something right. So I mean, I'm not a particularly, around my kids, I'm not swearing, but outside of that context, I'm not all that concerned about that kind of stuff. So I mean, I'm pretty hard to offend on that kind of front. So this is consistent with the dangerous words thing, where it's like I don't think people are actually that much of a fragile flower that's going to be broken by a simple word. But I also, that's a question that can be evaluated by, if you say a word and someone breaks, that was not the right word. It doesn't sound like they're breaking anything.
Right. So the issue is you're thinking about outcomes. Like we don't think that that people are that fragile most of the time. And at the same time, it may not be very effective. Like if we're offending or hurting people who might be natural partners or who might need resources, like that's not a great idea. And so when we talk about how your tone discussing suicide on Reddit, or if you're at a Suck It Suicide event, or if you're on the AAS Listserv, or if you're on the SPSM show and we have Proctofrog, like you're going to be really, everyone should be adaptive in their tone, right? Like so. The worst would be if you came on SPSM deciding this was going to be like presenting at an academic symposium, and then you found out it was not going to be like that, and suddenly there's a dumpster fire meme.
Right.
So Tony, we had someone asked about what a listserv was again, who just joined, one of our regulars. Can you just for some folks tuning in, just once again explain the difference between like a listserv, a bulletin board, and maybe like listserv, bulletin boards, chat rooms? Like there was a couple of iterations of this kind of idea, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not just iterative. It's also there's many different concepts inside of early internetworking that all sort of eventually became the thing that is called a listserv. So I won't cover all of that stuff. I'll just say that the idea of a listserv was to allow email, specifically the interface of electronic messaging that is email, to be used as a way to run an ongoing conversation that had many separate topics. So a group of people who were interested in, say, suicide prevention could talk about language, and they could talk about resources, and they could talk about crisis center practices, and they could do that all at the same time, all in line, just like as if they were in. The concept was an electronic version of a meeting, and that's what the early computer scientists thought that they were creating. Well, but remember earlier in the show, I told you that it was like totally Nerd City. So these people created this software for other nerds. So it was not meant to be easy to use.
Good news.
You were expected to know what Pine is and be able to run all these commands.
I had a Pine account.
Yeah, Pine was
when I was 19, I had a Pine account.
Yes, Pine is awesome.
Bart?
Pine is totally awesome.
I never had a Pine account.
I had a Pine account, and I went into chat rooms like early days, and it was not, there were no AAS APA listserv rules, let me tell you that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, ahead, Bart.
But there's some things I want to point out. There's some things that I think that are really important. When we talk about messaging, this idea that we're going to find some gold standard of messaging that works well for everybody, just drop that. What we don't know is there are some forms of messaging that help some people and might not help others or be harmful to others, and vice versa. And if we try to, and I'm just going to say this, our messaging around suicide prevention is so boring, so safe, so vanilla, right? It is okay. It's not effective. Let me say it another way. Our suicide prevention messaging is not effective. There, I said it. It's too safe. It's too boring. There's too many people that are making it so bland, vanilla, and safe that it's not safe anymore because it's not getting anything done, in my honest opinion. And so I think sometimes things that we don't consider safe actually get people's attention and may save lives, and I'm just going to throw that out there.
Of note, Bart, much like what Mike discussed for Dangerous Word Projects, that is an empiric question.
No, I just know it. I don't even think we need any science on it.
Mike, if you were going to do science on something like that, and I know I'm putting you totally on the spot. We never do that on the show. Like, what would you do? Like, if the question is our messaging like not engaging enough, or have we made it so safe that it's unpalatable?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, obviously you have to define your question pretty clearly. Is it not safe? Is the kind of thing that we are looking at with dangerous words. Like, if you write it this way, do people get upset? Do they think about suicide? Do they engage in behaviors? None of that pans out. The other question is it engaging? Okay, well, then you would recruit a bunch of folks. You figure out what target audience are you talking about. Are you talking about folks with lived experience? Are you talking about folks who have no idea about suicide? Who's you trying to draw in? You'd bring them in and you would randomize them to read different versions and see whether they give you feedback related to that. And maybe it matters. For some it does and some it doesn't. Well, that's also an empirical question. It's called a moderator analysis. You can say, well, okay, does this relate to this, depending on who you are? And it can produce all sorts of fancy numbers, but it also produces a pretty clear message of, well, this doesn't matter in general unless it's this, or this matters, but especially for these guys, or because of this, or in this context. Like, all of these are questions you can tackle if you define the question clearly.
Great. So if we do the guidelines create messaging that people are likely to like, comment on, and share. And share is the gold standard, right? Because you want to amplify message. Like, you could probably create and see, like, you could, in a quantifiable, objective way, which characteristics of messages that get more engagement and more network sort of airtime, right?
Yeah, and you could do that without bringing folks into the. I mean, you could also just do an analysis of existing material that's out there, as long as you're controlling for, like, well, this was released in this this area, and this was in this part of the country or whatever. But you could take a look and see, on average, do papers or articles with media guideline sort of allegiance get shared more or less than ones that don't, or are there specific guidelines that seem to play into people's willingness to share something, or the level of positive versus negative feedback they get? I mean, again, all those things can be measured if we know what the question is, and some of them simply involve going in and seeing what's already out there and what people have done with it. Some of it involves producing new material or bringing in old material, putting people in front of it and seeing what they do, which is mostly what we do as researchers, is say, here's this thing, now what happens when we do this to them, and then we draw a lesson from it.
I'm not one to put things on people's plates, Mike, but boy, is that an interesting idea.
Yes, if you find some extra hours in the day for me, that sounds great. There's a big audience here of people who could do that.
So I find this fascinating. We're spending millions of dollars looking at genetic biomarkers for depression and suicide. Millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars on this crap research to get at genetic biomarkers. And some of the things that are most important, like how do we effectively communicate in our environment to prevent suicide, there's almost no money for it, is my guess. I'm guessing there aren't these really big $1-million grants on how we communicate and reduce suicide via our messaging. But boy, if you want to you want to find a genome marker, I got $1 million over here. Yes, find us that genotype. We want to know it. Did that come off as cynical? I'm sorry.
Who has $1 million for anything in suicide prevention? Of note, just an aside, so we were at the VASP event, and I got to do a fireside chat with DJ Patil, who's the director of the White House Office of Technology and Science. It's super cool. And so his recommendation is that we just raise more private money, and then we can do more research.
Entrepreneurship, like that was his super duper thing, was like entrepreneurship.
So Mike, just to let you know.
So I should just go raise some private money and then run the study? I got time.
Yeah.
I got time.
Right. There's infrastructure for that. And there was a cool...
Admittedly, he's a chief data scientist, not... so he's used to an industry that is filled with billions of dollars, and it is also one of the most exciting things to have happened in the entire 20th century and the 21st as well. So he may have some perspective issues, but we still respect him because he's a brilliant guy.
I was like, dude, the NIH only gives us $60 million. Like, good Lord. But anyway, but I do think that should be studied. Bart is right that like money and resources for studying that, like, and if we think messaging is this important, and so many there are so many suicide prevention professionals who are putting so much time into thinking about this issue, getting the language right, getting the message right. We are putting a lot of our very limited resources into doing it. And we actually haven't done a lot of study about it, so that's probably really important. There was one question that we wanted to ask you that had rolled through the feed a little while back, which is, Mike, can you tell us a little bit about how the AAS Listserv serves AAS's mission? And I hope Tony will speak to that as well, being on the board.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I think that Tony could probably speak to it better than I can, because not being a member of the board, I don't know that I'm all that fluent in the mission. But my sense is that the board, I mean, the Listserv, AAS meets as a group once a year, right? There's a conference. I enjoy the conference. People chat. People are able to get exposed to a lot of material, but that's once a year, right? And so the Listserv creates an avenue for there to be a conversation between the conferences and get information out, and also touch on things that don't end up in conferences, right? And again, it allows people to reach out to folks they might not otherwise talk to who are in this field, and sort of advance the AAS cause simply by, again, having a conversation about certain aspects of suicide and getting information about it. So, I mean, might be my sense of it, but again, I suspect there's actually like a list of AAS missions that I can't articulate for you.
Thank goodness.
I will punt.
The AAS mission is pretty simple, and so we should all, those of us who are AAS members, should sort of know it. You don't have to actually take it to heart, but you should know that it exists. And it is simple, so you don't have a lot to remember. There's not several subpoints. There's just one thing, and that is to promote the understanding and prevention of suicide and support those who've been affected by it. That's it. That's the mission of AAS, to promote the understanding and prevention of suicide and support those who have been affected by it. That's what AAS does. So the Listserv is a perfect way to facilitate an ongoing conversation about how that might, how the various aspects of suicide prevention affect different communities, and what resources are available in new books and old books and all sorts of things.
And you don't have to be on Facebook or be on Twitter to use the Listserv, that is actually really important for people with broad differences in technology access and skill.
Sure, and it's easy for us to sort of poke at people who are not as sort of tech savvy as we happen to be. But there are a lot of people who have spent their entire careers in psychology studying some aspects of suicide, and they don't really understand Facebook at all. So and there's nobody to teach them. They don't have some facilitated way to learn how to use Facebook, but they've been using email for 40 years. So it's not a problem, because they were working at a university. They were some of the first people to get email, and so they're used to that interface. So it's a good way to communicate with them, and they have a breadth of knowledge that is irreplaceable. So it's not, but it is getting, the Listserv as a concept is getting pretty long in the tooth. So we need to keep pushing forward, and we're certainly working on different ways to do that inside of AAS.
More importantly, Tony, do explain, if people do have questions about moving that forward, or questions about the Listserv, wanting it to be different, or wanting decisions to be made other than what follows the guidelines or not, Dr. Anestis is not the person that they need to go to, right, Tony?
Mike has a really rough job, but his job is not to make all the rules. The board of the American Association of Suicidology makes the rules. Those rules are influenced very much by the chairs of the divisions of AAS. So if you are an AAS member and you go make contact with the chair of your division, so if you're in the loss survivor division, that's Janet Schnell. Hopefully she's out there somewhere. And you contact her and you say, as a loss survivor, I really think that these things about the listserv, and I'd like to see you guys have a wider discussion about this and maybe change the way this works. That will make it into a board meeting because then Janet will introduce that at a board meeting and open up that discussion, and then some process, several different processes get kicked in, which it gets super boring. So I won't, make you listen to procedure.
And I do want, and hopefully I'm not overstepping, and if I am, Bart'll hopefully ride herd on me. But my understanding is that AAS is really working hard to strengthen and improve that people talk, know what their division is, talk to their chairs, and be really actively engaged in that sort of chain of communication, because we want folks to be included, and we want them to be talking to their division chairs so that their division chairs can bring things that matter to membership and matter to the suicide prevention community to the meetings and make those changes, instead of giving Mike hell one day when Mike's just doing Mike's job, right?
Yes. The Mike is a volunteer, and AAS, above all things, attempts to support as strongly as possibly we can anyone who volunteers for us. So if you volunteer for us, you have a place of respect in AAS because we cannot replace those resources. We are not an organization with $100 million. We're just a little thing. What'd you say there, April?
Look at Mike's tongue. He was like, I'm sorry.
No, I believe it. No, I do.
Yeah.
But
we're trying.
It's also there's not that many people lashing out. It's not like I'm constantly getting emails. Like it happens.
Oh, no.
But more often than not, it's a non-factor. So,
Awesome. Yeah. But we do.
That's true. That'd be true for a bunch of other volunteer positions at AAS as well. So you should so everybody out there should know.
Volunteering does not. It's not jumping on a grenade here.
Yeah. No.
Good distinction. And for those of you who wonder, we did post a link in the SPSM chat blog to who the folks are who are on the board. Do get to know your board members and do build relationships with them. They really care greatly about the mission of AAS and helping you as a member, be engaged with that mission as well and have a voice. And I think that's another thing that you can do. You shouldn't be doing AAS business on the listserv, but if you do see something going on, that's an excellent way to follow up on that. Do I have that right?
And if you're not a member of AAS, by the way, we'd love to have you. Suicidology.org. You can join up this evening. Anybody?
That wasn't a very smooth plug, was it? That was very good. So we're getting down to final thoughts. That's Tony Woods, Mr. Subtle. Bart, do you want to start us off on final thoughts? I know you've been tweeting with some intensity. Is your feed working, Bart, for final thoughts?
Well, the thread's been great, and can you hear me?
Yeah, your visual is frozen, but your voice is coming through.
Good. So thank you. No, maybe not.
There, you're good.
Great show. Thank you guys very much. Thank you, Doctor. This is an and I love that. And thank you for doing the listserv. It's a big deal. Yeah. So, thanks, guys.
Go for it, Dr. Anestis. Can you please final thoughts?
Chris Maxwell had it best on here. I just saw on the feed. It's just don't be a dick and be effective. That's really pretty much all I'm looking for. Be nice to people and say something that's actually going to make a difference, or do something that's going to make a difference. And if the listserv helps with that, great.
You stole mine.
Ha! That's why you shouldn't go last.
Tony Wood, can you go ahead and chime in with the final thought?
I'd have to do a dance number to follow that one. So I got nothing. That's perfect.
Absolutely. And do you want to just, once again, suicidology.org?
Suicidology.org. Join AAS today.
Absolutely. And this is Dr. Foreman. We're hitting the end of the hour, hashtag SPSM. Some of you are just signing on because we promised you this year we were going to do some shows at different times, and we'll do a better job of giving people heads up about the time changes, because I've got a couple messages about that. But we're so grateful for Suicide Prevention Week. So my final thought is that this year, like when we started SPSM, there was almost no social media messaging about suicide prevention, and this was just a couple of years ago. This year, even though I'm on social media all the time and all the places, I physically could not stay awake long enough and keep up with all of the suicide prevention messaging that is out there. AAS Listserve is one great way to connect anybody, not just people in AAS, but connect anybody with the suicide prevention community, researchers, people with lived experience, folks from the crisis intervention and resource space. Like, please do help people connect. I hope that you'll be on the listserv talking about the suicide prevention messaging now that we've got quantity. I think there's some really good ideas about unity. We didn't talk about that in this show. We're going to be hitting them up in a couple weeks. Next week, I hope you'll be joining us. And this is very interesting for Mike. Sarah Schuster from The Mighty is going to be with us, and she's going to be talking about really effective media for the general public about having lived experience with mental health stuff, which is what The Mighty does, and they do a really good job of it, and so we're super lucky to have them. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a fabulous week. Bye-bye.